Hush, hush. Stay still. This won't hurt a bit. I'll soon have you right as rain.
Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 10, being recorded on the 2nd of September. I hope that each and every one of you out there watching this is having a fantastic day today, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So we're beginning today in Iosefka's clinic. Recall that the last time we were here, there was an abrupt change in tone in the dialogue from what seemed to be Iosefka, or what you might otherwise think is Iosefka, if you didn't know that it was imposter Iosefka. And recall also that in the previous episode we sent the afflicted beggar here. Let's get an update as to the afflicted beggar status.
Oh, hello. You're all right. Very good. He's safe with me now. I presume you're to thank. The treatment is going well. Stabilized, for the most part. Fascinating, really. Here you are, as promised. Oh, thank goodness you came. Be a dear. Find me some more.
Okay, very interesting. A few things worthy of note there. One was the insight gain. I believe we went from 91 to 92 insight. Second is the creepy laugh there at the end. So, if you hadn't clued in at this point that there's something funky going on beyond the abrupt change of tone, that laugh right at the end provides yet another hint of that. And the other thing is that she just gifted us beast blood pellets, which we talked about in the previous episode, and that episode has not yet been published, so you'll have to forgive me if someone explains it in the meantime, while I still don't really understand what it is. Large medicinal pellets supposedly formed of coagulated beast blood, banned by the Healing Church due to their unclear origin. Grants a spurt of beasthood, ripping apart the flesh of one's enemies and being rained upon by their spattering blood, invigorates one's sense of beasthood, feeding strength and euphoric feeling alike. Yeah, not entirely sure what to make of that yet. I'm wondering if that has to do with, because to be perfectly honest, I was expecting to be gifted a blue elixir. But perhaps you only get that from... Actually, I'll leave the item description there for now, in case I'm completely misremembering that. And the other thing that I found was very interesting was... she wasn't necessarily lying when she said that the treatment was going very well. She just is using a very liberal, or a very flexible definition of treatment. And we will go now and see what that definition is, what it is she means when she says that he's responding well to the treatment. Blue elixir. Dubious liquid medicine used in strange experiments, conducted by high ministers of the Healing Church. A type of anesthetic that numbs the brain. Hunters able to retain consciousness by force of will, will make use of a secondary effect of the medicine, which dilutes their presence while standing still. So a medicine used by high ministers of the healing church. And again, it should be it doesn't seem to be a coincidence that the likes of the afflicted beggar and Gascoigne seem to have head wrappings on, indicating either that their eyes are covered, or in the case of the afflicted beggar, that there seems to have been some sort of brain surgery conducted. For what purpose, I'm not entirely sure, but very interesting to note here that you can actually see the person with whom you're talking.
Oh, heavens, would you stop that? Every peep you make brings us bad luck. I have it bad enough already. Please, just leave a poor old woman be. Oh, heavens, would you every... Please.
So I don't see anyone else in there. So this would seem to be a woman who is in a somewhat advanced stage of beasthood that can still seemingly talk to us like a normal human being. So again, the line separating, or even the notion that there exists a line separating humans and beasts, is problematized here. And notice also that there's an incense burner here. So on the one hand, indicating that there's an NPC here whom we might be able to converse with, but on the other hand, suggesting that she is in an enormous amount of pain in there. Because recall that the incense lanterns are supposed to ward off beasts, and that person appears very much to be beyond the transformation point whereby the inner beast comes out. So very interesting to note. And also, and just as is the placement of these buildings here, and I puzzled over that in the previous episode, over why, this area seems to be filled with temporary settlements, or seemingly temporary settlements, and temporary defensive fortifications. And this tunnel, I've never really thought about it all that much. Until... Okay, I guess the dog glitch is alive and well in some way, shape, or form. But I've never really thought about this area until I started thinking about the Forbidden Woods and its purpose, and the potential of its being in close proximity to the Chalice Dungeons, the physical Chalice Dungeons. And this is probably something I shouldn't reveal without being able to go into it in further depth, but I believe that the Chalice Dungeons themselves, and so I need to correct myself, that Byrgenwerth might be significant beyond, or the Forbidden Woods might be significant beyond merely being near Byrgenwerth, also potentially as the entrance to the old underground labyrinth. And so the assertion I'm going to make, but that I won't be able to support for a little while, until later on, is that the Chalice Dungeons, as we know them, are part of the Dreamlands, and that the Chalice Dungeons are respective Dreamlands, or Dreamlands which replicate their respective parts of the old underground labyrinth. So just as the Nightmare of Mensis and the Nightmare of Frontier represent a reflection of the ailing land of Loran, but in the Dreamlands, so too do I believe that the Chalice Dungeons represent the Dreamland equivalent of their respective areas in the old underground labyrinth. And this area, in particular, may or may not be a site of potential excavation. Well, it certainly seems almost to be an excavation site, but this cave seems to have naturally formed based on the geological features. But, and it's amazing that looking at flowers in this playthrough is such an exciting thing, but look at the flowers. Or, potentially, look at the tomb mold. Material used in a holy chalice ritual. Mold that grows from rotten flesh and blood inside the old labyrinth. Matures to bear giant spores. And these appear almost to be cold-blood flowers that haven't fully bloomed yet. They seem almost halfway between the blooming cold-blood flowers and the cold-blood flower bulb. So as you can see, I do have an enormous amount of Chalice Dungeon, or Chalice Rituals. But I don't have them all yet, because, of course, you don't have access to all the chalices just yet. But could this be a site? And notice, of course, that there are an enormous amount of bones seemingly built into the foundation of this place. So again, the one wrench, I think, in this theory are these geologic formations on the top of this cave. I don't want to say roof, because it's not constructed necessarily. But it seems almost as if this was a site of investigation as a potential entrance to the old underground labyrinth. And that all of these buildings and fortifications here were set up not only to keep others out from the old underground labyrinth, but also potentially as excavation sites. So maybe the woman who lived in this house here was living there temporarily for research purposes from Bergenworth, although that wouldn't explain the Yharnamite clothing that she's wearing, nor the dogs. So I'm not entirely sure, but that's an idea I've been kicking around, and I wanted to hear what each of you thought about it. But and the idea rests almost entirely on the similarity of these flowers to the tomb mold. And again, and I say this with reference to many different subjects, seemingly every episode, but I am not an expert on botany, so... but at the same time, even an expert on botany would still have to try and interpret the approximations that these flowers are, because they're not especially high quality in terms of the textures used and whatnot, so... This might be just a gameplay thing, given that we're about to walk into a poison pond, but... small medicinal tablets that counteract poison, used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged old Yharnam long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. So that could just be there for gameplay reasons, to prepare you for the poison that we're about to have to endure. And look at this thing. But it could also be that this, that the Forbidden Woods was once a base of operations for a large-scale excavation, a large-scale investigation of the old underground labyrinth. And that maybe the workers who are here, perhaps in order so that they might work longer shifts and eat less, and so that the entire project doesn't cost as much money. Perhaps they were treated with the old blood, or given the old blood in preventative terms, so that they could keep working. And then maybe the Scourge of the Beast, maybe this was one of the places, in addition to Old Yharnam, where it first started really spreading and becoming a problem. I'm not entirely sure. The other possibility as well, given that this place connects to Iosefka's clinic, who is strongly affiliated with the Healing Church, the other possibility is maybe that the Healing Church was building this tunnel so that they might gain access to Byrgenwerth, but it seems like a really, really crazily difficult and, insane logistics to have to endure all that to simply gain access to the Forbidden Woods. And after the Healing Church left, it became the preeminent power in Yharnam, and Byrgenwerth presumably paled by comparison. So that seems unlikely to me. And we also have several church giants here, two of whom are almost naked. At the very least, they don't have weapons. A poison pond, speaking of which, we should equip some antidote. And the pond is also filled with parasite larvae. We also have an enormous gravestone here, similar to the one that we find at the Forbidden Grave. And in fact, that I believe we find littered throughout the Forbidden Woods. So I don't know, and more, if in fact this is tomb mold, more tomb mold growing all over the place. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. So if there are any geologists in the house, I was wondering if you could potentially weigh in about whether this cave looks like, it looks very much like this is a natural formation. I suppose it's possible that this was a pre-existing excavation site, and that the civilization, perhaps the Pthumerians, had previously excavated it, and that these geologic formations formed after the fact. These geologic features formed after the fact, I should say. There's also a white mist in here. If you've watched any of my Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2 videos, you know I'm obsessed with the embers in those games. And yeah, it looks almost like embers. Just like in the Chalice dungeons, there are parts where, I was going to say the sun, but moonlight, presumably, is leaking in from outside. There's another gravestone over there. Let's check out this one. Nothing discernible from what I can see. And that one side is completely covered in moss. Ugh. Just go away. But I did mention in the previous episode that we're going to be talking more about the parasites, and we are going to be doing that. It may or may not be today. But aside from being an annoyance from a PvE perspective, I think the parasites are very important. But I believe this is also the first time that we've run into them in the quote-unquote waking world. I knew I was missing an item somewhere here. But yeah, moving on for now, because I have more questions about this place than I have answers, but it is something that I wanted to draw everyone's attention to. And maybe others have already covered this and, you know, determined that these aren't, that's not tomb mold and that it's something else, or that maybe they're lumen flowers. But I don't know. More graves. And given the positioning of these graves, this would have to be, at least in part, an excavation site. Because why in the world would there be graves up here? And bodies just strewn about? Very unsettling. And more graves. When you actually stop to look at things in this game, it's remarkable what you see. More graves yet again. And that same corpse model everywhere, which is incredibly creepy. These bodies, seemingly not even in graves. Just piles of bodies. And all of this wood here, again, looking almost like they were attempting to build something in a somewhat impromptu manner. But that something went horribly awry at the same time. Or maybe those bodies have something to do with where we're going. Because they seem to just have been tossed into this hole. We are, of course, back in central Yharnam. Notice some more seemingly undisturbed graves. I don't know about this one here. That looks like it's just a lid. Pardon me for not knowing the correct name for that. More coffins containing body parts. Yeah, no idea where the corresponding grave for this would be, but let's keep our eyes open for that. Oh, maybe it was a front for this. That would kind of make sense. That this tomb was previously covering the ladder here. Maybe. But there's definitely more insight to be gained here. We just need to keep our eyes open. All we need are eyes. Dead horse. Lying in what appears to be quicksilver. and a brain sucker. Who drops Quicksilver bullets, coincidentally, or not coincidentally. Madman's Knowledge. This, I suspect, is at least partially a gameplay thing, because you'll notice that wherever there is a brain sucker, there tends to be 1 or 2 or 3 Madman's Knowledge pickups nearby. Simply because you're likely, at least your first time around facing them, to lose some insight, and then that way From just gives it right back to you. But once we ascend this ladder, things start really getting weird. Another insight gain, once again suggesting that we've stumbled upon something that is not only interesting, but also potentially significant from a story perspective. Here we see more wheelchairs, and wheelchairs seem to be more common than you might otherwise expect them to be, even for the time period. Suggesting that one of the apparent side effects of blood administration, perhaps some sort of weakening of the or disruption of the spinal cords, or just general issues with mobility. So we've almost officially begun the Lovecraftian twist, the Lovecraftian, or the turn to Lovecraft in the story of Bloodborne. If we had gone to the lower Forbidden Woods first, then we would have seen one of these guys down there, but in fact this is our first encounter with one of the Celestials. But who is it? It'd be hard not to feel bad for them. Because look at how it's staring at its hands, trying to figure out what the heck is happening to me. What has happened to me? We had a drop like that in the previous episode, didn't we? Beast, a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. A transcription of the roar of a labyrinth beast. The bearer of the beast rune has accentuated temporary transformation effects. Beast is one of the early Carol runes, as well as one of the first to be forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. Yep, that's the afflicted beggar. And yeah, notwithstanding the things he does to the Yharnamites in the Erden Chapel, it is kind of hard to not feel bad for him. Especially given the dialogue that we got when he was transformed into his beast form, together with seeing him just not being able to figure out what's going on, staring at his hands and wondering to himself, what happened? I used to be able to control my transformations. I could transform into a beast at will, seemingly. But certainly of all the NPCs you can send here, I feel the least bad about sending him here. And then we have this. And this is something else that I haven't figured out, and I'm not sure if there is an answer to this question. But the first question that came to mind to me when I saw this thing was, who was responsible for this? So after I became aware of the swap between Iosefka and Imposter Iosefka, you have to ask yourself, was this as a result of the treatments administered by Imposter Iosefka, or was it a pre-existing treatment that was administered by the real Iosefka? So, in a previous episode, I believe it was the last episode, I mentioned that in one of the earliest patches of the game, it was possible to jump over a fence in central Yharnam that would allow you to access Iosefka's clinic and, by extension, the Forbidden Woods, almost right at the beginning of the game. And so I did that glitch, and out of curiosity, of course, and found myself in here, and started wondering about that question, the question of responsibility, whether the original Iosefka, the genuine Iosefka, or the imposter Iosefka is responsible for this, or whether both of them are, potentially. Because you can't legitimately access this area until after the event is triggered, which leads the imposter Iosefka to take over for the genuine Iosefka. So the player was never intended to be able to enter the clinic, Iosefka's clinic, while Iosefka is still alive. Or while Iosefka is still herself, I guess I should say. Now, with all that said, if you do find yourself in here, whether via that glitch or some other one, this corpse is here. It's still here. Which leads me to wonder whether... Because yes, on the one hand, if the players aren't meant to access this area early, then there's no reason to not have this Celestial here. But at the same time, it could just as easily have been here before we were intended to access it. So it could just be a convenience thing on behalf of the designers. The players aren't going to see it, so it doesn't really matter anyway, whether it's there or not. Or it could maybe be a hint that Iosefka herself is responsible for this experiment in particular, or some of the experiments more generally. And of course here we have the Communion Rune. The item description for it reads: Communion. Several runes relate to blood, including Communion, which raises the maximum number of blood vials one can carry. This rune represents the Healing Church and its ministers. Blood ministration is, of course, the pursuit of Communion. So I want to talk a little bit about a post that Redgrave made on Reddit a while back, called the True Iosefka. And as usual, I'm going to give my usual qualifier, and that is I'm not going to recapitulate the argument in full, and that if you're interested, you should check it out, because a link will be in the description. But that the insight contained therein is potentially of enormous significance, and especially as it relates to the question of Iosefka's blood vial in the Nightmare of Mensis at Murgo's Loft, which we still have that on our docket of things to discuss. So something to keep in mind. We find another Celestial in here. Iosefka's blood vial. Blood vial acquired from Iosefka's clinic. This refined blood, highly invigorating, restores a larger amount of HP. The product of a slow and careful refinement process, this rare blood vial appears to be a clinic original. So contrary to my suggestion when we picked it up early on, that Iosefka's blood vial may... I still think that Adela's is likely menstrual blood. But we will talk about that a little bit later. But Iosefka's blood vial, and you can see the distinction between them. The color especially. And as many people pointed out in it was either the first or the second episode, that this appears to be plasma. Cainhurst summons. An old blood-stained summons inviting an honored guest to the forsaken castle, Cainhurst. Rather bafflingly, it is addressed to you. Do not hesitate, the stagecoach leaves from Hemwick Crossing. Very, very interesting. Something else that I didn't discuss when we started the game, and that someone pointed out in the comments, I'm sorry, I can't recall exactly who it is, but the possibility that this handwritten scroll, seek Paleblood to transcend the hunt, the possibility that either the note was for the Blood Minister, but I'm not sure why the Blood Minister would want to, nor be directed to transcend the hunt. Also, it's possible that it could have been that the Paleblood Hunter could have brought this note with herself or himself. Recall that in the opening cinematic, the Blood Minister says to us, "Oh, Paleblood, yes, of course, you've come to the right place." When, our character is seemingly silent. But maybe our character had the note with them and showed it to him. And he just said, oh yeah, Paleblood, we totally got that. Got that in spades. So, in returning to Iosefka's blood vial, I'm going to quote from the Redgrave thread from the Bloodborne subreddit, the True Iosefka, wherein he says, the blood in Iosefka's blood vial, quote, is amber. A lot of people have noticed that not all the enemies in Bloodborne bleed red. Specifically, the kin of the cosmos bleed a pale, off-white amber-colored blood that I refer to as serum. This includes Celestials, Brainsuckers, Rom, Willem, and Abridus. What is serum? It's blood that is bled by ascended human beings, those who have managed to expel the scourge of the beast from their bodies. They are beings who, as Mikolash so dramatically notes, have cleansed their minds of beastly idiocy. How, though, did they ascend? How the hell did Iosefka turn people into Celestials? Maybe it involved an injection of blood, pure blood that has been cleansed of the Scourge, specifically a clinic original. So unfortunately, it would appear that Iosefka is not the innocent doctor murdered by the evil church, but was a willing participant in all of it, up until she would be, for unclear reasons, betrayed by imposter Iosefka. In the end, Iosefka would be warped into a celestial being herself, a fitting end for a woman who invented the process in the first place. So according to Redgrave, Iosefka is the one who invented the process via the clinic original blood to quote-unquote ascend human beings to celestials, to kin of the cosmos. Pretty weird stuff. So I don't want to make a habit of this, because it is somewhat problematic to do this in the middle of recording. But we're going to do a backup of our save. If you want to see how to do that, or you want to understand why it is I'm doing this, you can check out the previous episode where I went into that in depth. And we're back. Our save is backed up, so we can ignore the imposter Iosefka's warnings and see what she's up to. What? Where is she? Okay. So presumably because we quit and reloaded, she went to the door. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself. Whoa! Okay, I thought maybe she would talk to us from there.
Won't hurt a bit. Just die. Enough of you. Now stop that.
Okay, I think we're going to... I think we're going to restore our save and then reload from outside. Because we didn't get any of her warning dialogue. So it looks like the save backup actually screwed us up there. Be right back. Okay, so we've quit and reloaded from outside of the clinic. So hopefully that puts Iosefka imposter Iosefka back in the right spot. So let's go see, make sure she isn't in here. She's not. Perfect, okay.
Ah, moonlit scents. How did you worm your way in here? Very unfortunate. I had such high hopes for you. Well, I won't make any excuses. Would you mind leaving us alone? Things need not change. You'll do the rescuing, and I'll do the saving. But if you refuse to leave... Oh well. I've always wanted to try my hand on a hunter.
She's always wanted to try her hands on a hunter. Recall that there's something special about Paleblood hunters. I would assume Paleblood hunters because there's really no requirement to be just a plain hunter. Most Yharnamites were recruited to just be plain hunters. So by that, I can only assume she's referring to Paleblood hunters specifically, who are able to retain consciousness by force of will, so that they can make use of the secondary effect of this blue elixir, which for other people numbs their brain. So since we backed up our save, we don't have to worry about aggroing her. She says she won't make any excuses. So the jig's up, she knows it, but she doesn't care. And she threatens us to ensure that we leave.
This won't hurt a bit. I'll soon have you right as rain.
So she looks almost identical to Iosefka herself.
Stay still. This won't hurt a bit. I'll soon have you right as rain. Just die. Enough of you. Now stop that.
Aegon Rive. Human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade, and the essence of the formless Great One, Aegon. Both Aegon and his inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. And I believe that Epic Name Bro did a video where he pointed this out, so I'll provide a link to that in the description if I'm remembering this correctly. But menstrual blood is composed in part of mucus. So the potential that we discussed in previous episodes, that at least some of the blood in this game is menstrual blood, seems to be all but confirmed with that drop. Note also that's the same rune that Adela dropped in the previous episode when she was killed by the afflicted beggar. She was wearing I believe the white church garb, which recall refers to it as attire of special church doctors. These doctors are superiors to the black preventative hunters and specialists in experimentally backed blood administration and the scourge of the beast. They believe that medicine is not a means of treatment, but rather a method for research, and that some knowledge can only be obtained by exposing oneself to sickness. So remember when she said that the treatment was going according to plan? So it's not necessarily that they don't see medicine as treatment, but just that they have their own definition of treatment. She was also using the Augur of Abridus, remnant of the Eldritch Truth encountered at Bergenworth. Use phantasms, the invertebrates known to be Augurs of the Great Ones, to partially summon abandoned Abridus. The initial encounter marked the start of an inquiry into the cosmos from within the old labyrinth, and led to the establishment of the choir. So even though Imposter Iosefka was wearing the white healing church garb, the fact that she is wielding Augur of Abridus would seem to suggest that she was in fact a member of the choir. Some more chains and stuff here suggesting, and is this just a bucket of nails? Oh no, those are syringes that don't look especially sanitary. So some really just nasty stuff happening here. Was it happening under Iosefka and merely continued under Imposter Iosefka? Possibly. It could have also just been accelerated by Imposter Iosefka. But I believe that Iosefka herself, even though she seemed very much to be a well-meaning doctor, that she was complicit in some way, shape, or form with what was happening. At the very least, I think that that's almost indisputable. Okay, time to restore our save. So I believe that Iosefka will once again spawn at the door there. So we're going to want to quit and reload one more time to ensure that she's not aggroed. Okay, she's not there, so we're safe. My concern was that if we left there without quitting and reloading from outside the clinic, that she might be aggroed, which might ruin the rest of her quest line, so...
Oh, hello. Still alive, are you? I need more patience. There aren't many humans left, I know, but find me every last one you can. We must find a way to surpass our own stupidity. You're one of the bright ones. Don't you see how much this means? Yes.
Almost fell off there. That was really not smart. We've come to check up on Gilbert.
Have I heard of Bergenworth? Afraid I can't say that I have. The locals aren't apt to share any local history. I'm afraid I may not be of help for much longer. I know nothing of a Bergenworth, and I'm afraid I may not be of help for much longer.
Ah, poor Gilbert. Poor Gilbert. Before we get to the comment section for this week, I wanted to briefly discuss what makes this episode somewhat unique from those which came before it. As you may or may not have noticed, the commentary up until this point was recorded entirely in the moment. That is, in past episodes, I've peppered post-commentary segments throughout the entire episode, allowing me to process that which I said during the live commentary, so that I might present a more polished version of my thoughts and theories for the end product. I decided not to do that in this episode because much of the speculating and theorizing I did this week was almost entirely in the moment. I had no idea, for instance, that I would have spent something like 20 minutes talking about the flowers in the apparent excavation site between the Forbidden Woods and Iosefka's clinic. I noticed the similarities between these flowers and the level 5 tomb mold a few minutes before I started recording. So what you just saw wasn't a rehearsed presentation of some theory I had been working on for weeks, but rather a potential discovery made almost entirely in the moment. While to be sure, there were many things I knew I wanted to talk about in this episode, which is why I had that Redgrave quotation handy, for instance. There are a few reasons why I decided to experiment in this way. First, so that I might save a little bit of time, allowing me to maintain the one episode per week release schedule, despite the fact that my personal schedule is about to become much more hectic than it has been in past months. Second, so that you might witness that I'm not really all that much more knowledgeable about the lore of the game than are any of you. I do occasionally feel a little uneasy about post-commentary because it can create the impression that I have all the answers, when in fact it's more likely that I'm just more confidently restating that which I trepidatiously discussed during my live commentary. In other words, I'm learning about the lore of the game alongside each of you, rather than passing down lore tidbits from on high. Third, and finally, because I think there's something to be said for allowing the game to speak for itself, without me having to point out every little tidbit that I notice. This might also help to ensure that each of you are making up your own mind about the lore, rather than simply accepting that which I've said as some sort of canonical narrative. For example, you may have noticed a baby crying in the background of the last few episodes. This isn't especially significant on its own, because you can hear a baby crying normally in the game, but not until after the blood moon rises. So, as a result of the fact that we have more than 60 insight, we are here too bearing witness to something that wasn't there before, because the blood moon in our playthrough hasn't risen yet. I tried to make it a little bit more obvious in this episode, however, as no one has mentioned it, or mentioned having heard it in the last few episodes. But I'm bringing all this up because I wanted to solicit some feedback from you. Is this something you would like to see me do more often? That is, should I include more live commentary and leave some things implied to see if people pick up on them themselves? Or should I lean more towards the hybrid style of commentary that I've used in previous episodes? Or, alternatively, did you not even notice that there was anything different in this episode? Whatever the case, as always, I very much appreciate any feedback you might be willing to offer. Moving on to the comments for this week. First up, we have a comment from Jipoap47, who writes that humanity might be the new normal, and the old blood is the older normal. I wouldn't say they are humanity's hollow so much as predecessor, caught between an old god of physicality and a new god of mentality. Vile blood might be between on the beast end, thus the queen's seeming immortality, and pale blood between in the other direction, thus our metaphysical immortality. The crazier stuff is other gods' blood getting thrown in. 70% tinfoil hat, 30% educated guess. And so to that I would add 100% interesting. And I know that I say everything is interesting, and I guess that's a selection problem because I'm more likely to select the comments that I find most interesting. But whatever the case, I did just want to add something that I responded. I wanted to echo that which I said in my reply to Jipoap47, and that is, this is getting really messy. And I don't say that to complain, I say that in a good way, because I like messy, I like entanglements, I like intersectionality. And so I did just want to acknowledge this comment because it does a really wonderful job of illustrating the extent to which the storyline in this game is messy and entangled and intersectional. But we're not entirely ready to deal with what's said within it. We do still have to go to Canehurst, and so that's a huge piece of the puzzle that we're currently missing, but that we will try to see how it fits into the picture when the time comes. Now, before I get to the next comment, I did want to make an addendum to something I said earlier when I mentioned that on the subject of menstrual blood, I mentioned that Epic Name Bro had a video about it, and he does, and I've linked to that in the description below. But in the video that Epic Name Bro posted, in the linked video, he actually points out that Lucatiel Knight on the Bloodborne subreddit was the first person, seemingly, to have posted in public about the notion that some of the blood in Bloodborne may in fact be menstrual blood. So I wanted to first acknowledge Lucatiel Knight and also acknowledge Epic Name Bro for actually, despite being a big YouTuber, actually taking the time and making the effort to give credit to community members who come up with things. But also to draw on something that Lucatiel Knight said in the post itself. And so I'll just read directly from the post. Quote, "Is it menstrual blood? And if you're grossed out by this, bear in mind that there is an enemy in the game with its back cut open and stretched over its head. So don't get all precious on me." End quote. So I did just want to once again put this out there, because I know that it's something that a lot of people seem to have a hard time discussing online, and in particular in gaming-centric communities. But it's something that there's really no reason to be grossed out by it. It's without the female reproductive functions, none of us would be here. So for my part, at least, I really don't understand the hesitation and the, ew, gross mentality that I see sometimes when subjects like this are brought up. So while I appreciate and I respect that for some people, for whatever reason, it's just not something that they like to talk about, I would kindly ask that we try to not joke about this, just because I don't think it's productive, and I do think that there is something here, that there is something to the idea that at least some of the blood in Bloodborne is menstrual blood. And so with that said, that post provides us with a segue to a comment we received from Neolucky, who writes, "The moment I heard flora, I immediately recalled information about the menstrual cycle and bacterial flora. Being female myself, this is a term quite often used for microflora found in tampons, sponges, and other items inserted into the vagina. So if we apply this to the moon presence, could it be they are simply a bacteria within the moon? Some sort of cosmic thing that shouldn't exist during the cycle? Bloodborne has such a tie-in with cycles, blood, and women that it doesn't seem a huge stretch. And of course, flora meaning the flowers, giving it a double meaning, or even a third, as flowers are often used to represent a vagina. So again, I will really appreciate in advance some maturity on this subject, because I do think that this is an incredibly interesting comment, and a very potentially fruitful avenue of investigation that we should all seriously consider. And I know that we have tied, and we did establish earlier that flora, in the context in which the doll uses it, is likely a poetic apostrophe, and that we have kind of broadened out and looked at a number of these different things, trying to find connections from other places. But this is one connection, and maybe not to the specific things that Neolucky mentions in her comment, but to the menstrual cycles of women, and these are things that, historically speaking, were tied to the cycles of the moon, as Neolucky points out. So since I already kind of went into this earlier, another thing that I will mention is when we look at the Writhe rune, and this is something else that is mentioned in Epic Name Bros video, that the Writhe rune speaks of mucus, and it would seem, at least to me, to be a reference to cervical mucus. So, what to make of all this? And I know I just went into a whole thing about how this is a very potentially fruitful avenue for investigation, so you would think that I would have I would have charted out where this investigation might, or where we might take it. But honestly, I don't know at this point. But I am asking that we kind of think about this, and that it's something that we consider going forward, because I really do think that there's something there. And quickly before I move on, I did also want to mention that in Lucatil Knight's post on Reddit, she or he makes a very interesting point about Ariana, and pointing out that Ariana will give you as many blood vials as you want, as long as you, to a certain point based on Adela's questline, but she will give you blood vials until the blood moon rises, at which point she starts feeling sick. Which means that she's pregnant, she's not going to give you blood anymore, because of course at that point she's no longer menstruating. So very, very, very interesting. And so this is a topic that we will go into once the context calls for it. I did receive a number of comments like this one from No Killots, who writes, "Would love to hear your theory on how you can see the steeples in the clouds on the edges of the map in the Nightmare Realm." And so I received a number of comments about this, and I'm not sure if this is specifically to what No Killots is referring, but there does appear to be a number of sailing ships wrecked in the fog that surrounds the Nightmare Frontier. You can see that there are masts coming out from the fog, and the tattered remains of a sail attached to that mast. At least that's what it looks like to me. I did want to acknowledge this comment and all the others that were made on that subject, just to say that for now we're going to leave it, but that we will 100% for sure be returning to the Nightmare Realm when we are a little bit better equipped to deal with that question, to try and tease out why in the heck those things are there. And I suppose just briefly on my supposition from earlier that the Chalice dungeons don't actually take us to the physical waking world version of the old underground labyrinth. And this ties back to what some of the quotations I read from Redgrave in episode 8, where we discussed the Dreamlands. And in that episode, I read out a quotation where I don't recall whether or not I got to this point at the end, but Redgrave says that teleportation is just another way of traveling in the Dreamlands, or to the Dreamlands, from the Dreamlands. And to me, it seems almost as though it's no coincidence that when we enter the Chalice Dungeons, we warp there. We don't physically enter these dungeons. I believe that what we do when we create when we do these rituals, when we create, for example, a root chalice, how else could you possibly explain a root chalice unless the Chalice Dungeons themselves are parts of the Dreamlands, unless the Chalice Dungeons represent a reflection of the physical underground labyrinth. So yeah, that's about as far as I'll go into it for now, just because I am still thinking about it. But I am very interested in hearing what each of you think. But that's going to do it for this episode. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.